quite an honor to be talking to this group. Actually, back in 2019, in November, right when all the fires were around Sydney and the sky was very smoky, I was there to speak at the Reserve Bank of Australia during the Pacific Island Central Bank Governors meeting that was hosted in Sydney by the World Bank. And so that was quite an honor to be there at that time. And at that time, I attended the meetup there at this hotel, but people were not so interested in SORA at the time. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about PokeSwap and about SORA first, because SORA is like the network that PokeSwap is being built on. So I think it's important to kind of understand SORA to understand PokeSwap. It's just as an introduction about myself. So I'm the CEO of a company called Soramitsu, and we're a blockchain technology company. We created Hyperledger Iroha blockchain, and then we use this for working with various enterprise users. So for example, we worked with the Central Bank of Cambodia, and we built a very fun system called Bakong there, working with them. And we've done many different works. We've done many different projects. So we worked with Bank Central Asia and Indonesia on an identity prototype with blockchain. We have been working with Web3 Foundation since 2018 on Kagome, which is a C++ implementation of Polkadot. And we've been working with Filecoin on a C++ implementation of Filecoin since 2019. I'm a naturalized Japanese. That's why maybe it looks so Japanese, but I moved to Japan quite a while ago, and I was a research engineer for many years. Yeah, and we're trying to release PokeSwap this week, so I'm a little bit frazzled right now, but we're doing our best. So SORA is a decentralized world economic system, and this is the network that PokeSwap is being built on. And so I think it's kind of important to understand some of the concepts, because PokeSwap is way more than just a DEX. PokeSwap is also a decentralized monetary authority in some ways, because there's the monetary policy of the SORA network is built into PokeSwap. It's one of the reasons why it's such a complicated product. Just developing a XYK automatic market making DEX is very simple, but building the SORA tokenomics has been a majority of the work that we've been doing. So what is SORA? So SORA really is a crypto economic system. And so what does that mean? So up until now, a lot of projects have focused on creating tokens or doing different just kind of like a decentralized money, things like that. But that's just it's just one small piece of a larger picture. And a lot of these projects don't really have any monetary policy. And actually, having no monetary policy is the same thing as having a monetary policy. It's just not a very good monetary policy. So, we kind of, back in 2017, I originally proposed this project, and we kind of thought, could we use some of our knowledge of working with the central bank and doing, our knowledge of economics to do a better job to create a crypto economic system. But first, it's important to understand what an economic system is. And so there's many possible definitions. So what is an economic system? So an economic system is not only money, but it also means to allocate, it's a means to allocate money and control the quantities of money that are allocated. So that's kind of, it's not just the unit of account, store value, medium of exchange itself, but it's also how you allocate that in a rational way. We focused a lot on quantities as well, because quantities matter in an economic system. If you actually study economics empirically, you find that there's no market clearing, that all markets are rationed, that there's no equilibrium, and equilibrium economics is really a fantasy. It's not even a very useful fantasy either. So it's really the short side of each transaction that really determines, not only the price, but also some political benefits too. So it's really this allocation of of resources that is really one of the key things in an economy. And the work of Richard Werner is really one of the, he's obviously not the only one, and many of these ideas are actually quite old, but in modern and in English literature, he's one of the first, and he's really taken the quantity theory of money a little bit further and gone and disaggregated it. He really says that it's the quantity of money that's created for production that determines, the health of an economy and the economic growth, versus money that's created for things like consumption or for speculation. An easy way to think of this is kind of looking at Fisher's equation of exchange. So there's a few different ways to formulate this equation, but essentially you have the money stock in an economy multiplied by the velocity. So the amount of money and the movement of the money has to equal the trade in real goods, basically. So you have the prices multiplied by the output. So you have some quantity of goods and services multiplied by their price, has to be balanced out by an initial or by an equal amount of kind of money and velocity on the other side. So if you want to have growth in the real economy, you have to create money for economic growth. So this would be, if you want more goods and services, you have to first create the money that facilitates the creation of these goods and services, and then you have more productive output. This was the main finding of Richard Werner, and his book, New Paradigm in Macroeconomics, is really a great book. There's hundreds of pages of statistical testing, and it's really quite thorough. So I recommend that. I'll just kind of move forward a little bit, but it's important to remember that really at the macro level, there's three ways that you can create and allocate money in an economy. You can create money for consumption, in which case you get hyperinflation, like the Weimar Republic, right? That's always a classic example of having a big barrel full of money to buy a piece of bread. That's what you get when you create lots of money for consumption. And if you create money for asset transactions, you have an increase in asset prices. So this is like the housing bubble of 2008. Actually, there was a student, I think, who worked with Professor Werner, who wrote a paper about the housing market in Australia, and they found that because banks typically, when you get a house loan, they create new credit out of nothing, right? And then they give it to you to buy the house. So that's creating money for asset purchase. And so if banks didn't create the new money, but if they just lent out existing money, housing prices in Australia would be 80% cheaper, is the finding of the study, and it's like that everywhere in the world. So it's quite interesting. Anyway, so the main focus, or the main point I want to really express with this, is that creating money for case 3, which is for investment, for new, progress, scientific progress, new goods and services, that can result in growth without asset or consumer price inflation, even at full employment. And this has been shown. If you want proof, you can read Richard Werner's books, and he talks about post-war Japan and Germany, and lots of examples from that. Anyway, so how do we go from this theory to practice? That's really one of the goals of SORA, to really create an economic system where we allocate new tokens for productive use. Is the simple idea. But you want to allocate, with some democratic supervision, right? Otherwise, if you have that allocative power, there's always a incentive to use it, for personal gain, which really wouldn't be. It's like basically not very different from the system that we have now, which is not very good. So what we propose in SORA, and this is still being developed, it's not going to be out for a little while because it's very complex, but we propose to create a decentralized parliament that's based around multi-body sortition. And this is based on really the principles of Athenian democracy. So people think of Athenian democracy as being like some direct democracy system that didn't really scale, but that's not really what it was at all. And even Athenian democracy evolved quite a bit over 200 years. So it was a very complex system that improved quite a lot over time. In Athens, they relied quite heavily on using sortition to randomly choose from a pool of citizens in order to make decisions. And there are three key principles or methodologies. The first is isonomia, which is the idea that as citizens, you all have political equality. There's no, like if you're in the pool, you're in the pool. There's no preferred selection. And then there's a right to speak and contribute. So that's called isegoria in the Greek. My Greek is not so good, but the idea that as long as you're a citizen, you have the right to speak and you have the right to contribute if you want to contribute. And that's a very important principle. And then finally, they used probabilistic sampling to, I mean, they didn't really have full probability theory, but they actually came up with this method of, using a sortition machine to randomly choose people to collaborate and make decisions. Even when they had like a chosen council, like the Council of 300, they would typically just, to make a vote, they wouldn't ask everyone to vote. They would just randomly choose 30 people out of the 300, and then they would make the decision for everyone. So there's lots of advantages to doing this type of system. You prevent factions from forming, or we call them political parties in modern parlance. And really, you want to make it so that even minority opinions have, probabilistically can be represented, because I think it was Hayek that wrote about how a democracy is really just a dictatorship of the majority, and it's really terrible. It's a really unfair system because you pretend that it's fair, and you're not really being intellectually honest. So a system like this really is fair because you have equal probability of being chosen, and you can have even quite niche or minor opinions being at least expressed, even if not decided on. Okay, so how do we put this into practice? The whole idea is you have a separation of powers where you have many different councils or subcommittees or bodies, whatever you want to call them, and you never have a single group of people doing everything where they make a proposal and they make a decision. You always have to have the separation of proposing, filtering, and decision making, so that you don't have any like tendencies for control. So the idea is that we'll have a group of citizens. To become a citizen, you have to stake 150 ZOR, ZOR is a native network token. I'll talk about it in a little bit. And then if you're a citizen, any citizen can propose some topic to vote on. This is an agenda. This would be first filtered by an agenda council, which is randomly chosen group of people from the citizens. They would just say, like, should we consider this or not? Because a lot of these proposals it's like a spam filter, basically. There can be a lot of spam, right? Especially in a decentralized, like pseudo-anonymous network. If it passes the agenda council, the next step is to go into interest panels. And they don't have to be fully randomly chosen. Like an interest panel is kind of like people who kind of raise their hand and say, I'm interested in this topic. And they, because they have this interest, they can sit down and write some report about the topic. And there's no limit to the number of interest panels. Like if you have many different opinions, everyone can do their own research within the deadline and put this. In practice, the SORA Parliament will probably hire some full-time experts as needed to study different things like this. So you'd have some reports written by so-called ministries, right? But they don't have decision-making power. It's just, they take a topic that's been proposed and they study it and they write a summary of pros and cons, and then they give it to a review committee. And then the review committee or council, they take all the different reports and they coalesce it into a very short summary of pros and cons, and then prepare the format to be voted on. And then that gets given to a policy jury, which is a randomly chosen group. of citizens, and they make the decision. And the policy jury has the final decision on all referendums or proposals, but they can, there's also like a veto mechanism and things like that. So it's a little bit complicated. So this specific structure was kind of built in consultation with Borisius. He's a political scientist in the US who wrote this paper in 2013 about democracy through multi-body sortition, Athenian lessons for the modern day. And we contacted him and got some feedback from him that was reflected in this model. Anyway, that's the brief idea. The idea is to create like a decentralized system of governance, because you want to allocate money or tokens in a democratic way, right? I'm going to skip some of these slides, but I'll just say that some of the theory behind what we're doing with SORA is, you want some stability of exchange rate of value. It doesn't have to be stability, but it should be kind of predictable, because otherwise people won't really. It's hard to bootstrap the store value property of the token otherwise. And also, we focus a lot on having an autonomous circular economy. Maybe even for like 20, 30 years, it can be hard to build up a fully circular economy where these tokens can move around inside the economy. But that's okay. We can start a little bit at a time, and we increase the places that accept XOR for payment. And this is part of one of the main strategies for expanding the ecosystem. And as part of the decentralized economic system, at a high level view, it's really made up of many different layers. And so this is just a diagram that's not very pretty, but it shows the different layers and the design goals. So you have the governance layer, which should be kind of like multi-body sortition. You've got the monetary system layer, which should facilitate the unit of account, medium of exchange, and store value properties of this XOR token. You have the monetary policy layer, which give you some price stability as the objective, so that you can bootstrap these. You support the monetary system layer, right? And then finally, you've got layers at the top, 5 and 6, which are really allocating tokens in a democratic way, and that promotes economic growth and human progress. Really is one of the goals. So there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to kind of skip some of these, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how this is implemented in practice, because otherwise it's a bit too theoretical, I think. So what we'll be launching in a few days is the Soar Network, and the Soar Network looks like this. So as you can see, so we're using Parity Substrate, which is a blockchain platform, the same that's being used by Polkadot and Kusama and other projects. So it's an open source platform that you can use to build blockchains, blockchain networks. So we're going to have our own set of validators to start with. And as part of that, we also have nodes that will maintain bridges. So we have our bridge that we call Hashi, which is a Japanese word for bridge. And we'll be starting out with a bridge to Ethereum. And then in the future, we'll be adding bridge to other networks. Actually, any EVM-based network we can support. So I'm not going to say the names, but use your imagination. And we also recently signed an agreement with Tau protocol to work on building a rebasing EVM bridge to Binance Smart Chain in order to support the Tau synthetic assets. So Tau assets are using Bitcoin standard hash rate token, BTCST, which is a tokenization of Bitcoin hash rate as a fundamental value basis for synthetic tokens. And then, so their first token right now is Tau Bitcoin, and they're adding other ones too. And as a rebasing system, so you do have some market operations using the BTSC underlying value basis, and then at the same time you can have some rebasing to take tokens from people to reduce the quantity, and that's one of the things that they're doing. As part of the Soar network, we also will have, we plan to have a parachain. So this would be for Kusama to start with, and then in the future the Polkadot. This is really made more for convenience, but also it can increase the security too, because we can get transaction finality from the relay chain, which would be nice. And then right there in the center is PolkaSwap, of course. PolkaSwap is very integral to the Soar network just because the way it's the tokenomics are designed in support of the economic system, namely the token bonding curve, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then shortly in the future, we'll have our own price oracles. Price oracles are very easy to implement using Substrate because you have off-chain workers. You don't have to pay money to other oracle providers. You can just do it yourself. It's very easy. And we're going to have liquidity arbitrage mechanisms to execute trades on other DEXs and centralized exchanges potentially through PolkaSwap. So that's our basic network. There's 3 tokens in the ecosystem. One is ZOR. This is the native network token that's used to pay transaction fees. It's an inflationary token, but without any maximum supply, but it's generally bounded by the collateral deposited into the token bonding curve. So there's some limits. For VAL, you have the initial supply is going to be 100 million, and it's deflationary. So unlike ZOR, VAL will be decreasing over time because it's burned with each transaction on the Soar network, and also purchases from the token bonding curve. And this token is used to reward validators. For PSwap, the initial supply is going to be 10 billion. This was recently increased, but it's okay. Everyone likes PSwap, so why not have more PSwap? So this is a deflationary token, and it's burned with each swap transaction on PolkaSwap. And it's used to reward liquidity providers. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the future. Gee, this is complex. I'll mainly skip this, but I'm just going to say that this is how many different parts of the Soar ecosystem fit together. So you have citizens. Citizens lock up Soar, become a citizen. They get randomly chosen to make decisions about allocating tokens, mainly as equity investments for projects. So if you want, so if you're a wine company or cheese company in Australia or something, you can make a proposal to get invested in. This would be due diligence, and everything would be done by an investment fund that's being set up. That the Soar Parliament has the final A or nay decision making for. So I'll talk a little bit about the token bonding curve and how it fits into PolkaSwap and how the token bonding curve is used to support the monetary policy of ZOR, because I think this is kind of a cool topic. So token bonding curve, for those who don't know, is very simple. It's a smart contract that takes this input some tokens and it gives some output as well. So token bonding curve can have many different functions. So the one that we use, we have a buy function and a sell function. And what that means is there's a buy price that's decided by a mathematical curve, and there's a sell price that's also decided by a mathematical curve. And on the y-axis, you have price, and on the x-axis, you have the quantity of XOR tokens in circulation. So the quantity that's minted, right? And the idea is that if you want more ZOR, you can buy it on the secondary market, which would be bounded by the price between the buy and the sell function. Or if the price goes too high on the secondary market, you can actually buy cheaper from the primary market, which would be the token bonding curve. And you would just, buy this as you would any other purchase. It's built into PolkaSwap and it's completely transparent to the user. So this is kind of like a market-based approach to managing the quantity of XOR, because figuring out the exact quantity of tokens to put in circulation is a very hard problem, and it's there's no really good theoretical basis to handle this besides doing something like a market-based approach, right? So if there's a huge demand for ZOR tokens, it's very simple. You inject more tokens into the economy. If there's a huge demand to sell, or to, no one wants SOR tokens, you remove tokens from the circulation, because when you sell into the sell price function, this returns the reserves from the token bonding curve, but it also deletes or destroys the SOR tokens that were sold. So that's a little bit complex. Maybe here's another view of how it can look. So you have volatility between these two different price bands, basically, is how the SOR token should, in theory, work. But reality is always a little bit more sloppy, because you have potential to execute trades without full reserves in the ecosystem. So when you're buying SOR, it's very easy. So on the left-hand side, you can see the primary buy function. In the secondary market, when the price goes up too high, it automatically will switch to token bonding curve, and the price becomes more predictable, right? But when you're selling, you may not have full reserves in the token bonding curve to back all the SOR. The reason for this is historical, because we have 350,000 SOR in circulation already, and there's no reserves yet because the network is the version 2 network is not launched. So if you want it to sell, it's as shown on the right-hand side. When you're selling, ideally, when you hit this point with the token bonding curve, you would just sell into the reserves and the price would be predictable. But in actuality, you might fall through that. And so what you do is you kind of simulate what you would have with the secondary market using an XYK curve type of math in order to give a price quote from the token bonding curve. And reserves of the token bonding curve are quite important. So this is how the token bonding curve will look in SORA. So there's a 20% margin between the buy and the sell functions, the ideal sell function. But in reality, the sell function will look more like this darker curve that is like, starts at the ideal sell function price, but then it falls off much faster than the ideal, right? So to encourage collateralization of the reserves, there's some P-swap bonuses at launch. And so 25% of the P-swap token supply will be kind of provided for kind of incentives for buying directly from the token bonding curve. So if you buy SOR, buy newly minted SOR from the token bonding curve using ETH or DAI, you can get some P-swap tokens because you're collateralizing the ecosystem by doing that. Okay, so this is all a little bit abstract. So maybe let's show how it actually works. So this is our dev stand environment. These are test tokens, so don't get too excited. Let's see. So this is what PokerSwap looks like, by the way. So you have a standard DEX functionality like swap, pool. You have your bridge. I'll kind of show this stuff in a little bit. But I just wanted to point out from the token bonding curve, if you are swapping between like a reserve currency like P-swap and SOR, then the token bonding curve can be automatically executed. So there's actually 3 different settings. So if you're working with like another, like let's say USDT, let's see these settings. Yeah, so it's like when you're not working with the token bonding curve, you can see these settings go away, like it's not applicable. But if you're swapping between SOR and P-swap, for instance, you get these settings and you can choose the market algorithm. So you've got smart, token bonding curve, and XYK. So XYK means the secondary market. Token TBC is token bonding curve. And then smart is the combination of the two. So the smart works kind of like, where's this slide? Here we go. The smart works like this, where you combine the secondary market and the primary market together in the same order. That's what smart does. So if I try to sell, selling, how many is this? Like 30 million P-swap. I can this gives me a price quote of 31 million p-swap for 1.8 million ZOR, which is a lot of ZOR. It's more ZOR than exists. But how do we get this price quote if ZOR doesn't exist like that? It's because of the token bonding curve. So if you go to the secondary market, you can see there insufficient liquidity. There's not enough liquidity to execute the trade in secondary market. But if you enable the token bonding curve or even the smart, you get a price quote. That's because the token bonding curve acts kind of like it's almost like a central bank that's like injecting, money stock into the system to provide liquidity to facilitate the trade. And then taking these, reserves as collateral. It's not a loan, but it's because it's not a debt-based money system, but it's the same principle. And you can see that from the smart algorithm, you get slightly more tokens than a token bonding curve, and that's because smart combines both, and it works the opposite way too. Like if you want it to sell, here you can see, I guess you get the same answer. Yeah, so in some cases, so this will be fixed in the updated testnet, but token bonding curve in some cases can be less liquid than the, not liquid, but the price quote is not always optimal, but we're going to fix it so smart will always give you the best price quote no matter what. But you can see that, yeah, for large orders, even if you want to buy like $1 trillion worth of ZOR, you could do it, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, that's to me, that's really like pretty radical and innovative. So token bonding curve gives us not price stability per se, but it gives us what's called forward guidance on the price of ZOR, and that's because there's some known amount of reserves. You get a fully transparent and known price quotes, right, for the buy and sell function, which is kind of nice. It's also an autonomous money stock adjustment mechanism because the token bonding curve will inject ZOR into the economy or remove ZOR from the economy as needed. And it gives you a lot of monetary policy variables to play with because you can change the slope of these functions in order to optimize for different cases. At the beginning, we just use simple linear like lines. So the slope of the line is $1 increase per 1,337 ZOR put into circulation. So that's the simple slope. And that's arbitrary, but that's okay. It's good enough. And then that's for the buy function. The sell function is just 20% less than the buy. But you can use any kind of mathematical function in these. But linear math is much faster for the calculation. Yeah, there's lots of monetary policy variables. I'm not going to talk about all this stuff. Here's kind of how the token bonding curve works in the causal dynamics. You can see that assets kind of flow into the ecosystem and over time should kind of build up and stay there, especially because there's a 20% margin between flowing in and flowing out. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, let's see. There's a lot of stuff, and I don't want people to fall asleep. I think it's already late enough in Sydney. But yeah, I mean, I could talk for 5 hours on this topic. There's a lot of really cool comparisons with SORA versus kind of like the nation state model that we have now. So you can kind of see how these two different economic layers kind of fit together. So you have like SORA parliament, which gives you multi-body sortition democracy versus constitutional governments, and then you've got like blockchain, using Ethereum and Substrate versus like RTGS and CLS Swift. And you've got like the debt money that countries use versus the non-debt tokens that we have. And it's just, you can find some parallels between the two. One thing that was recently approved in a referendum was the establishment of an investment fund for the SORA Parliament using the SORA Parliament's store of VAL token. So we're in the midst of setting this up, but the way it will work is it's just a regular investment fund that will be doing equity investments in companies, and but the final decision of whether to allocate or not to the companies will be done by the parliament, by community voting, until the parliament is set up, and then the parliament after that. So it's kind of a way to it's not really a DAO, but it's kind of a way to get a secondary opinion from the community on every investment. Geez, so a lot of stuff. We did a lot of causal modeling of the ecosystem. This is a simple view of it. You don't want to see the complex system, but there's different causal loops, positive loops, R1, R2, R3, and that's kind of to target economic migration into the SORA economy, the moneyness of SORA, moneyness being store value, unit of account, and medium of exchange of SORA. And then for like kind of VAL, purchasing power, I'll say. So that's kind of how different things fit in. The basic idea is that, yeah, everything should kind of like feed into each other and over time build up this ecosystem because of the positive causal dynamics that you have. Skip some of this stuff. And I think I talked about a lot of these things. One of the maybe non-obvious things about the token bonding curve is it does provide a lot of protection long-term to the ecosystem because it provides some value basis for every token in circulation, which means if you have like short sellers who want to crash the price, it's a lot harder, right? So even if you had like a state actor who wanted to shut down the ecosystem, it'd be very hard for them to do it because if they crash the price, they also reduce the quantity, and eventually the quantity and the price will kind of, you know, reach some shelling point where they're not going to go down any farther. So it is a way to kind of preserve the ecosystem and prevent the peg from being broken. Not peg, but the forward guidance of the token. Yeah, and I think I talked about all the different layers. It's a little complex. Anyway, this is the SORA platform upon which PokerSwap is going to be built. So I think it's important to talk about PokerSwap next.